My fellow freelancers, what is going on, y'all? Welcome back to another Sly Nation Fixing Anthem video. So far we've talked about Fort Tarsus, Traversal, and now let's dive into the open world here in part 3. I've made quite a few comments about the open world within the other videos, but in this video we're going to dive into the thick of it and talk about what needs changing, what works, what does not, and how we can advance the open world of Anthem to accommodate the remake currently underway, or Anthem 2.0. The open world of Anthem is vast, quite beautiful, and in a much better state than it was during launch. Several things have changed over the past year and for the better, but things still are not as good as they could be. So let's start with something I've said before, the Anthem Monster Hunter World crossover thing. And I don't mean like an event with actual Monster Hunter themes and trademarks. I'm talking about something like Monster Hunter but Bioware style. Anthem unleashes all kinds of odd plant and animal life, oddities that mutate, change, and adapt to their surroundings. This would seem like a scientist's dream, an Arcanist's dream, and I'm envisioning a specific type of Arcanist NPC who could be stationed within your Strider. This NPC would be your entry point into all things flora and fauna within the open world. Studying these animals could yield special types of armor, weapons, lore, skins, and depending on all what happens with the Anthem overhaul, it could be a source for upgrades for your suit, weapons, and so much more. This scientist NPC could be responsible for all kinds of bounties as well as earnable cosmetics. Say for example, you have to scan 250 of a specific small type of flower, and your reward is a hologram that could be attached to your javelin where it keeps growing out of your shoulder. Or scan and take down those rhino-looking beasts, and you can learn how to clad your javelin in its armor, not only improving your overall armor and its stats, but giving you the looks as well. This simple addition could result, in a huge amount of entertainment. XP, cosmetics, new armor, new weapon upgrades, crafting elements, and the list goes on. This also rests on the Strider becoming a usable space within the open world as well, which I am convinced needs to happen, as I mentioned before. Some players have accidentally glitched in or loaded into the Strider while messing around near it in the open world. So if it partially exists, and kind of like stored away in the game right now, then it would be an easy fix and an easy addition. Alright, ladies and gents, next up let's talk about purpose. Right now the open world doesn't have much going on outside of events. Once an event goes away, we're back to small public events, which are fine, but nothing of excitement. The Titans are also there as well, but one thing I'm not a fan of, the multiple difficulties. The open world should be mostly an area where the majority of the things are the same level, but within it, on the outskirts, pocket of harder content. All around the open world are these cave-like areas that contain enemies. They currently really have no purpose other than existing. You go in there during the campaign, and that's usually mostly what they're there for, but afterwards, they don't really have much of a purpose. These can be repurposed into like a Destiny 2-like Lost Sector, where you fight your way to the end to fight a boss. The majority would have a chest at the end that drops shards, crystals, loot, whatever, but these mini dungeons would fit into and be a piece of an overall larger idea. As it stands right now, free roam areas are broken up into a handful of difficulties. This causes a lot of different instances and causes odd wait times. In my opinion, it would be best if there was only one open world, but within it, different areas or sections that scale in difficulty. Within a few pockets or one large area in the open world, it should be designated as the hard area. This area could appear ragged and scarred, as the Anthem has affected this place more so than other areas. The enemies are harder, more plentiful, and the public events equally as difficult. Then, within these cave-like areas that I just talked about, and as you see here on screen, have a truly unique boss that is the hardest to beat within the open world. It drops exclusive loot that only comes from that boss, and on top of it, it has a low drop rate. However, it cannot be loot that the game has now. While things have improved, especially legendary weapons, the system as a whole still does not do it for me, which we'll talk about in another video. Like I mentioned before, fixing Anthem is not just one or two areas, it's about actually digging down and resetting multiple systems. So these open world strongholds, mini dungeons, or whatever you wish to call them, could be a reason to actually visit this space, actually visit the open world. If unique loot is to be had, players will want it, especially if it's powerful and also hard to get. Each area within the open world could have kind of like a pinnacle boss located within these caves, and each boss, like I mentioned, drops unique gear that could rotate with expansions or updates. Perhaps a couple of these would be nothing but puzzles instead of enemies. As it stands right now, the open world with an Anthem needs a few things, among them different experiences, choice, and a reason to stay, all while allowing you to free roam. If Anthem had different zones within different difficulties, you wouldn't have to exit out and choose another difficulty to then wait an extremely long load time and then load back into the same area, the same instances, with hopes for higher, better gear. If Anthem had different zones with different difficulties, you wouldn't have to exit out and choose another difficulty to then wait the load time and then load back into the exact same area just for hopes for higher gear. This way you can simply fly into the harder area, start your activity in an instant. Areas that are at or below your level could become standardized, so no matter what your level advantage, you would hit and take the same amount of damage regardless, and of course dependent on your level armors, weapon attributes, etc. But the harder areas would of course scale things up. This would keep lower level areas fun while still delivering a challenge elsewhere. With these harder zones would of course be harder to find and catch monsters for your Arcanist back at the Strider. It would allow for faster matchmaking as now there's only one open world and not several. On top of that, these areas would absolutely require help from other freelancers, which currently is not always the case, but the easier areas could be absolutely completed by yourself. Alright y'all, and moving on to another part here, and something Bioware has done recently with its updates, collectibles. However, the reason those collectibles didn't stand out was because the open world as it stands now is kind of boring, and it didn't really quite get the attention they deserved. But in the future, more incentive is going to be needed for collectibles as well. The Christmas wreaths I thought were a pretty cool idea, but there was no incentive to find them, and they were all way too obvious, way too easy to find. They stood out and they had that really loud audio cue. More of a challenge in locating these items is going to be needed, but also the incentive wasn't really there to find them all. Collecting them all could unlock, say for instance, something like an exclusive shader, vinyl, emote, weapon skins, or if the Strider makes a comeback, perhaps something like a skin for the Strider, or even perhaps an emblem for your character. These things catch on quick, and in a game like Anthem, players love collecting everything. Of course, this isn't a quick fix-all for everything, but it's definitely a start. Originally, I wanted to keep this video fairly quick since my last couple videos were so damn long. So let's get to the final few things I think the open world needs. Contracts or bounties need to return, and once again guys, incentive is the key. All of these systems within Anthem need to feed off one another, and the way Anthem's crafting system, loot, and open world sits as of right now, they are all within their own circles, not really overlapping. Crafting needs to bleed into the open world, into loot, into bounties, strongholds, missions, etc., just as bounties or contracts need to bleed into strongholds in the open world. Each playable activity or part of the game needs to have a circle back into another piece of the game. This gives depth and a reason to keep playing. For example, crafting. Say you can only earn a specific type of resource from bosses within the open world, and if you're crafting high-end gear, then it only comes from the harder difficulty area of the open world. Perhaps say you're trying to craft a legendary weapon, then a specific resource for a legendary weapon only comes from the most difficult boss in the hardest area or the hardest stronghold, or the hardest bosses within those mini dungeons we talked about earlier, or maybe even perhaps from the elemental giants found within the harder area of the open world, such as when they pop up as public events, the elemental titan. However, you get to this point by completing a bunch of bounties and contracts, and upon turning one in, a hidden RNG-based contractor bounty drops for you that will allow you to build such a weapon. This multi-staged hidden bounty requires rare resources such as those from the hardest bosses, and even a new rare resource could be implemented that, say for instance, I don't know, grows out in the wilds but can only be found on the highest peaks and only grows like, in 5 places within the open world at any one time, or something like that. Something different and something hard to do. That makes this gun tell a story, not just about what the gun is itself, but the memories created while you were building it. You could think back and say, oh my god, it was so difficult finding those 5 damn things, blah blah blah. I mean, every time you equip the weapon, it always kind of brings you back in time to when you had to actually build this thing, how long it took, how hard it was to do. But now that you have it, it's so awesome to use because of how powerful it is. So doing these bounties gave you the opportunity. Completing it requires doing more bounties, as well as going into the open world and finishing strongholds or, killing hard bosses for the resources. Best of all, it has real incentive to actually complete as it's powerful. These overlapping areas is something Anthem really, really needs. During launch, the crafting element did overlap in some areas, but the rewards were stuff you could get from just about anywhere. On top of that, there was no real reason to craft and reroll weapons because the loot system and the attributes that involve upgrades and additional perks that wasn't really fleshed out enough. That system is confusing, you can't see it working, and there are way too many small upgrades spaced across way too many pieces of loot. So that benefit quickly left, and it was replaced by giving players resources at the end of missions, chests, etc. The current system of loot, the upgrades, loot rolls, attributes, talents, that's something I'm really no expert in, and that's going to be one of Bioware's biggest challenges for the upcoming refresh. How to take weapon rolls, talents, and attributes and put them into a new system. The current system just isn't good, and it limits potential of other areas in so many different ways. I don't really have any recommendations in that area because I'm not really sure how to fix it, but it is something we'll talk about within my Fixing Anthem loot video coming out here soon. It's a tough area that requires teams of developers to study and to develop, over time, but regardless of what comes next, I know it'll be an improvement. And finally, guys, the last thing I want to talk about within the open world, hunting. And I don't mean hunting as in the Monster Hunter thing I mentioned at the beginning of the video. I mean hunting for secrets. Bioware did a good job with the score multipliers during the Cataclysm events and hiding certain things within the challenges to allow for that. It was limited to Cataclysm, but eventually sprawled out into other areas of the game. However, the hunting I'm referring to is much larger in scope. Similar to Mass Effect Andromeda, which, by the way, guys, I just started replaying it recently because I was bored one morning, and even though I was one of the very few who stood up for the game to a certain degree, it's actually so much better than I remember. I highly recommend playing it again and give it a second go-around. But in any case, back to the topic at hand, like the Revenant in Mass Effect Andromeda, those puzzles around the different planets that led into those Revenant caves, I forgot the actual name of them, but just like that, Anthem needs more mystique within the open world. We have these massive floating structures, like zapping lightning everywhere, which seem mechanical and advanced beyond our comprehension, so much so that they seem magical. Ancient castles crumbled all over the place. The open world would greatly benefit from exploring these relics littering Anthem's world. However, each entrance to these structures needs to be hidden, and I don't mean simply grab a team, touch 3 symbols and a door opens. I mean something like a team needs to actually work on it for a while to solve. Perhaps for the first few areas, these relics or Anthem engines, the ones that are located in the easier sections within this new open world, could be kind of, I guess, easy to get everyone started, to kind of show you how these things are going to, work across the entire open world. Think back to Destiny's very first raid in Destiny 1, the Vault of Glass. You had to stand on 3 plates as a team to build a column, which was the key to opening the portal to enter this giant structure. If any of the enemies stood on one of the plates, the column would begin to collapse, and you had to rebuild it. For the first one of the 2 of these Anthem engines, something easy like that, but each area needs to have a hidden puzzle which opens up one of these strange Anthem relics or Anthem engines, whatever we should call them. These creator engines, whatever they're called, would be so awesome to explore and check out how they work. And I know the level design as well as the things Bioware could do inside of these Anthem relics would be awesome. You could have hidden lore stashed away in crevices or smaller one-man puzzles. You could have some place to go swimming and have a bunch of puzzles down below the water. Or you could come back later, solo by yourself and try things out that way. Or perhaps it leads you to a true maze with hidden chests and death traps all over the place. Once again, the mind could fill these things with all kinds of awesome moments. But the point of these Anthem engines would be to grab a key at the very end, because all of these come together for something awesome. To make solving all of these Anthem engine puzzles relevant, each one would give you a key that's used to open the main engine floating within the open world, and within it, a very specific way to get something crazy, like a way out there glowing sci-fi armor that you can only get once you opened each area and collected all the keys, or perhaps a one-time weapon in a style that's completely unrelated to Anthem. I mean, if these engines mutate the world and the animals around them, who's to say they cannot do the same to items or technology? Once the community cracks the code on how to open each of these Anthem engines, a dormant program could then kick in that drops different bounties or contracts, and each bounty or contract entices exploring these engines and finding all of the hidden items within them. Or you could even have something like Anthem's echoes within each, a small orb of energy that when touched, kind of transports you back to a glimpse where the world was long ago. Artistically, it's free reign when you're dealing with something like Anthem and its raw power. And once again, guys, this is nothing that I'm hoping to see that I think will actually make it into the game. These are just things off the top of my head that I think Anthem needs to kind of push it, over the top, because Anthem right now in its place, flying is kind of old news, right? I mean, we've all seen flying, we've done it, we've played the game. It's, you know, a year old by now. It's not going to have that same, oh my god, we're flying kind of feel. Like, it's not new anymore. Everything about the game is now old. So Anthem needs something else to push it over the top to get people to come back. And I think doing things like this within the open world is a great first step. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, and the final thing I wanted to touch on, public events and player size. First of all, I think 4 players is way too small. We need to introduce more people, but I think Bioware already knows that, and there's technical limitations to that. Also, we know Anthem's loading screens are insane. That, more than other things, needs to be prioritized because players will leave a decent game just because they have to wait 3 minutes at every single load screen. Then, once you're done with your event, you have to go back through the thing multiple times. I mean, it's absolutely maddening over a course of a couple hours. On a good gaming PC with a high-end SSD, Anthem is tolerable, but an HDD or console, it becomes absolutely frustrating. So here's hoping they can optimize load times within Anthem 2.0. Touching back on the public events, Bioware, in my opinion, has been doing pretty good. I mean, they've done some pretty cool things with these small-time events. The timed racing platforms, the smaller Cataclysm-like events, and adding more of the smaller skirmishes all around the map. These work well, but once again, it falls back into those area of circles I mentioned earlier. When you have loot and the open world and public events, they start kind of clashing. The loot isn't worth a player's time, and if the loot's not worth anything, there's no reason to do public events to get loot. It doesn't have enough incentive to attract players. Of course, this can be solved by reworking crafting, loot, and progression. Once those change, these public events are fine just the way they are. Like I've mentioned multiple times before, Anthem doesn't have one single problem that if you change that, it's going to solve everything and the game's going to be great. There are a lot of small problems across a lot of areas. This can be solved by reworking crafting, loot, and progression. Once those change, these public events are just fine the way they are. I've said this time and time and again that I'm no game developer, nor am I good at making stories, but I do know what a game needs to sate its player base, and a game like Anthem, or any MMO, it absolutely needs a thriving open world, and parallel to that, its endgame activities. That is what will keep players within Anthem's universe instead of wandering elsewhere, because there are some pretty freaking fantastic games out there that can suck you up in their universe and keep you locked in a heartbeat. Destiny is one such game, Warframe is another, but the list is pretty large, and I hope that this upcoming remake, we will see the open world and all the other game systems keeping each other alive by crossing into one another and not only giving players a fulfilling endgame, but a living, fun, and challenging open world. So yeah, that's about it, guys. Like I mentioned, there's no two ways about this. Making video games is hard. Also, the fact that video games are more popular now more than ever, the ever-increasing standard of gamers, and the fact that each dev studio is trying to outdo the other, and you have one extremely tough job ahead of you. Bioware has been my favorite development studio since I became a hardcore gamer, all thanks to Mass Effect oh so many years ago. And since then, many things have changed. The company, the pressure, the money, technology, the criticism, especially fanatical criticism. I really do hope that EA lets Bioware do their thing and give them the time they need to recreate this game. It has loads of potential. I think we all know that. That's why we're all so kind of heated that it didn't work out. However, no matter what dev company you love, video games are a business and they exist to make money. Rarely do AAA games get created simply for the art form and expression. It happens with small budget indies all the time, sort of like passion projects. But when you start talking tens of millions of dollars, budgets rule and guidelines are created with them in mind as well as deadlines. So here's hoping and wishing Bioware all the best. I think Bioware absolutely needs a win, and if they can turn around Anthem and make it one of the better games out there in 2020, that would be an incredible statement piece. Anyways, that is it, my friends. I am out of here, y'all. As always, thank you guys so much for watching and for supporting Sly Nation. If you're new to my channel, then welcome, compadre. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching me when there are loads of other choices out there. I really do appreciate it. Feel free to check me out on Twitter or Facebook at Sly Nation or Sly Nation Gaming over on the Facebook. If you wish to get in touch, Twitter or Sly Nation Gaming 67 at gmail.com. Those are the two best ways. For business inquiries, emailing is best. Spank the thumbs up or down if you liked, loved, or hated the video, and be sure to subscribe for the rest of my Fixing Anthem video series, as well as other videos including Destiny guides, game reviews, gaming news, and much, much more. I said I tried to make quicker videos, and I'm sorry, I absolutely failed. I'll try again next time, and I apologize for it. Anyways, take care, y'all, and keep those eyes open for more Sly Nation content coming out here soon. But until then, this is your dude Sly, and I will see you all in the next one.